Warehouse security work seemed boring, until I realized the truth. Have you ever thought that warehouse security work is just about sitting around, staring at monitors, and hoping nothing happens? Well, think again. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into why this job is way more exciting than you might imagine. From high-tech surveillance systems to dealing with unexpected challenges that keep you on your toes, warehouse security is far from boring. It's all about staying alert, solving problems, and even preventing some serious issues before they happen. So, if you want to discover the real side of warehouse security and how this role might just surprise you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join me here at MR.Quentin's channel for more exciting content. Let's explore this world together. Click and subscribe now. The air was thick and stifling, trapped beneath the weight of a humid Texas night. Sodium vapor lamps buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow across the nearly empty parking lot of a self-storage. The place had the desolate stillness of a forgotten corner of the world, silent, save for the occasional rustling of wind through chain-link fences. I had worked the oil rigs for years, but those days were behind me. Now I found myself here, taking the night shift as a security guard for a self-storage facility. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, or at least that's what I had been told. My predecessor, Mark, was a wiry, nervous man with sunken eyes and a jittery demeanor. He handed me the keys with a grip too tight, like he was passing along something far heavier than a simple job. "Listen," he muttered, voice low and urgent. "Just stay away from the far corner of the storage lot. Whatever you do, don't go back there." I frowned. "Why?" Mark hesitated, his gaze darting toward the dimly lit rows of storage units. He swallowed hard. "Just trust me." And with that, he was gone. I stood there, gripping the keys, staring down the long, shadowed corridors between the storage units. The job was supposed to be dull, mind-numbingly so. But as I settled in for my first night, an uneasy feeling gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I wasn't alone out here, not really. The office was a cramped, windowless box, barely larger than a storage unit itself. A single flickering fluorescent bulb hummed overhead, casting a sterile, washed-out light on the peeling walls. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old coffee and something vaguely metallic. Against one wall sat a battered metal desk, its once gray paint chipped away in places to reveal dull steel underneath. A rickety plastic chair groaned beneath my weight as I sat down, the sharp creak echoing in the otherwise silent room. Before me, a bank of outdated surveillance monitors flickered with grainy, static-laced images. The cameras covered nearly every inch of the facility, from the front gate to the endless rows of storage units stretching into the night. The black and white screens created an eerie, detached view of the place, making it look more like old security footage from a crime documentary than a live feed. At first glance, the map pinned to the wall beside the monitors seemed straightforward, every storage unit labeled from A to Z, neatly arranged in long corridors. But as I studied it closer, my brow furrowed. Toward the back of the property, there was an empty space where another row of units should have been. It wasn't labeled, nor did the cameras seem to cover it. Mark hadn't mentioned anything about this. Something about the gap unsettled me. Maybe it was just a design flaw, an outdated blueprint, but my gut told me otherwise. I reached for my phone to make a note of it, but my hand hesitated. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't want to write it down. That was when I noticed the folded paper wedged beneath the desk. It was tucked in just out of sight, as if deliberately hidden. My fingers brushed against the rough edge, and I pulled it free. The page was yellowed, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, scrawled in thick black ink that had bled into the paper over time. At first, it looked like a simple list of security protocols, but as I read further, my pulse quickened. A1 self-storage. Night shift rules. Do not approach or open storage unit number 1906. If you hear noises coming from inside, ignore them. If something appears near unit number 1906, do not look directly at it. Under no circumstances should you check the surveillance footage of this unit after 2 a.m. If the lights flicker more than twice in a row, leave the office immediately and do not return until sunrise. A cold sensation settled in my chest as I reread the list. I scanned the map again, searching for the number 1906. It wasn't there. I flipped through the surveillance feeds one by one, but there was no camera marked for Unit 1906 either. It simply didn't exist, at least not on any official record. Yet someone had gone through the trouble of writing this warning. I exhaled slowly, shaking off the creeping unease that was starting to coil around me. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some bored ex-employee had left it behind to screw with the next poor soul who took this job. But Mark's warning echoed in my head. Stay away from the far corner of the storage lot. The first few hours of my shift were uneventful. I did the standard rounds, checking that the storage units were locked, ensuring no one had hopped the fence to break in. The place was eerily silent, save for the occasional hum of traffic from the distant highway. But around 1:45 a.m., the office lights flickered once, then again. I stared up at the buzzing fluorescent tube, feeling a prick of unease. Twice. That wasn't the number I needed to be worried about. Still, I reached for the surveillance monitor instinctively, flipping through the feeds. The grainy black and white footage scrolled past, rows of storage units, chain-link fences, the empty parking lot. Then, something shifted. One of the cameras flickered, just for a second. A small disruption, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I flipped back. It was a view of the far end of the lot, where the map had shown an empty space. Only now, there wasn't empty space. A storage unit was visible, just barely at the edge of the frame. I hadn't noticed it before. It was set apart from the others, its metal door slightly darker than the rest, almost like it had been scorched at some point. I leaned in closer. Something moved. A shadow, just at the corner of the screen. My fingers hovered over the buttons. I knew I shouldn't. I knew what the paper had said. Do not check the surveillance footage of this unit after 2 a.m. I glanced at the clock. 1:58 a.m. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. The shadow moved again. But this time, it didn't shift like a trick of the light. It stretched, grew. I yanked my hand away from the monitor. The fluorescent light overhead flickered. Once, twice, a third time. My breath caught. The paper crinkled in my grip as I clutched it tighter. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood up too fast, knocking my knee against the desk. A sharp pain shot through my leg, but I barely registered it. The air in the office felt different now. Thicker, heavier, charged with something I didn't want to name. I didn't look back at the monitors. I grabbed my keys. I stepped out of the office, my pulse pounding. The night was still and humid, the sky a dull, starless black. The storage unit stood in neat, silent rows, stretching into the darkness. I glanced toward the far end of the lot. For a moment it looked normal, just another row of storage units, just metal doors and concrete. But then I saw it, the unit that shouldn't exist, and standing just in front of it, something. I didn't stay to find out what. I turned, and I ran. The office clock struck 2 a.m. with a quiet but definitive click. The sound barely registered in my mind, but what followed did. A heavy thud echoed through the facility. I froze. Then another, and another. The sound came from the far corner of the storage lot, the same direction where the shadow had moved on the monitor, the same place Mark had warned me about. The noise wasn't hurried or frantic, like someone trapped and desperate to get out. It was deliberate, measured, like something was testing its own strength. I held my breath, ears straining. Thud, Thud, a slow, rhythmic pounding against metal. I squeezed my eyes shut. My grip on the desk tightened until my knuckles turned white. Ignore it. The warning on the paper burned itself into my thoughts. If you hear noises coming from inside, ignore them. I tried to obey. I really did. But this wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure, a weight that settled into my bones, pressing down on me, filling the room with something heavy and wrong. It wasn't like hearing a noise through the walls or the distant hum of traffic from the highway. This was different. The pounding resonated inside my skull, rattling through my ribs like a second heartbeat. My skin prickled, every nerve in my body screaming to move, to leave. But I couldn't. I was stuck, half standing, half seated, like a deer caught between the decision to bolt or freeze. Thud, thud. It continued, steady, unwavering. A part of me whispered that if I could just hold still, if I could just wait it out, maybe it would stop, maybe it would go away. But deep down, I knew better. Because it wasn't just knocking, it was waiting. Seconds stretched into minutes, or maybe they didn't. Time felt strange, warped, like I was trapped in a space just slightly out of sync with reality. I forced myself to move, to pull my eyes away from the flickering light above me and focus on the desk, on anything else. My hands trembled as I reached for my radio, but I didn't even know who I would call. No one else was here. No one would believe me. Would Mark? Had he heard this before? Was this why he left? The idea sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to remind myself that it was just a noise. That was when the knocking changed. No longer slow and steady. Now, it was closer. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear the shuffle of movement, but somehow I knew it had moved. Thud. No longer from the farthest storage unit. Thud. Somewhere in the middle of the lot now. I sucked in a sharp breath. This wasn't possible. Storage units didn't move. Sounds didn't travel like that. But it had. And it was still coming. I grabbed the crumpled piece of paper from the desk, rereading the last line with a sickening certainty. Do not look directly at anything that appears near unit number 1906. It's not near 1906 anymore, I realized. It's coming here. Breaking the rule. A logical person would have stayed put, locked the office door, and waited for morning. But fear doesn't make people logical. Fear makes you act on instinct. And my instinct was screaming, run. I shoved the chair back, the legs scraping against the tile as I stood up too fast. My body felt heavy, like moving through water. Every nerve told me to get out, to put distance between myself and whatever was coming. But another voice, quieter, buried beneath the fear, whispered something else. You have to see it. It was an irrational, terrible thought, and yet my feet were already moving toward the door. I stepped out into the night, the air thick and humid against my skin. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the storage units in their unnatural glow. The world smelled of dust, rusting metal, and something faintly wrong, something I couldn't name. I turned toward the far end of the lot, and I saw it. It stood in front of a storage unit door, but not one I recognized. It wasn't quite in the same place where 1906 should have been. No, this one was closer, far closer than before. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, its proportions just off enough to make my skin crawl. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but I knew it was watching me. Even though it had no eyes, even though it had no face at all, a shape, just barely human, a shadow that didn't belong to anything, stretching in the wrong direction beneath the yellow glow of the lamps. The pressure in the air grew unbearable, a deep, suffocating force pressing against my chest. My vision blurred at the edges, my ears ringing with something high-pitched and sharp, like a signal just beyond my ability to hear. It wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to see it. You shouldn't have come outside. The thought wasn't mine. I stumbled backward, my heartbeat hammering in my skull. The moment my foot crossed the threshold of the office again, I slammed the door shut. The air inside felt lighter, the pressure gone. I stood there, panting, gripping the desk as my legs threatened to give out beneath me. I glanced at the monitors. The storage lot was empty. No figure, no open doors, just rows and rows of silent, lifeless units stretching into the night. My stomach twisted, because I knew what I had seen, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it had seen me too. Somewhere outside, past the glow of the security lights, it was still waiting. I should have left. I should have locked myself in the office, waited for sunrise, and handed in my keys the next morning. That would have been the smart thing to do, but fear and curiosity are two sides of the same coin, and somewhere in the mess of adrenaline and dread pooling in my gut, the latter won out. I had to know. Had to see. My feet moved before my mind could stop them, carrying me back out into the humid night. The storage lot stretched before me, endless rows of corrugated metal doors standing like silent sentinels. But I wasn't heading for just any unit. I was going to the one that wasn't supposed to exist. The further I walked, the colder the air became. Not the natural chill of a desert night, but a deeper, unnatural cold that seeped into my skin and settled in my bones. My breath came out in shallow puffs, visible in the dim light. That wasn't right. It was still a Texas summer. It shouldn't have been this cold. But it was. My fingers tingled as I curled them into fists, trying to ward off the growing numbness. The rows of storage units loomed higher now, the lights overhead casting long, distorted shadows that stretched in the wrong directions. I turned a corner, and there it was. I knew it was Unit 1906 before I even saw it. There was no marking, no sign, no indication that it belonged to the neatly numbered grid of storage spaces around it. But I felt it, an undeniable pull in my gut, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me this is it. The knocking had stopped. The air was thick with silence, pressing against my ears like the static hum before a lightning strike. I swallowed hard. The door looked like every other one in the lot, corrugated metal, padlocked shut. But unlike the others, this one seemed off. The texture was wrong, the color just a shade darker, like it had been left out in a storm that never touched the rest of the facility. My breath hitched as I stepped closer. Then from inside, a single deliberate thud, not urgent, not desperate, just a slow, steady knock against the metal. I hesitated. The rational part of me screamed to turn back, to follow the rules, pretend I never saw this, and walk away. But something else, something deeper, urged me forward. I reached out. My fingertips brushed against the cold metal. The moment my skin made contact, a sharp chill shot up my arm, like touching dry ice. I yanked my hand back with a gasp, shaking out the numbness creeping into my fingers. The knocking stopped. A new kind of silence filled the air, a silence that was listening, watching. My pulse thundered in my ears as I lowered myself slightly, pressing my eye against the thin gap between the door and its rusted frame. And what I saw, I should have never looked. Inside, the space was small, barely larger than a closet. There was no clutter, no storage boxes, no forgotten belongings like in the other units. Just a wooden chair. And a mirror. The chair sat directly in front of it, its surface worn and splintered, as though someone had spent years sitting there. The mirror was tall, spanning nearly the entire wall, its frame simple and unadorned. But what made my stomach twist, what sent ice lancing through my spine, was what the mirror didn't show. The room was reflected perfectly, the chair, the walls, the dim light filtering through the narrow opening of the door, but not me. I wasn't there. I stepped back instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. I waved a hand in front of the gap, nothing. The chair, the walls, the mirror, all remained unchanged. Except for one thing. The chair was now occupied. I jerked forward, my eye pressed against the gap again. The figure in the chair wasn't there in the actual room. It only existed in the reflection. Its posture was rigid, back straight, hands resting lightly on the armrests. It didn't move, didn't twitch. But I knew it was aware of me. I couldn't see its face. The angle was wrong, the reflection too dark. But the sensation was undeniable. It was watching me. A deep, suffocating dread coiled in my chest, squeezing my lungs, making my legs weak. Every instinct screamed for me to back away. Then the figure shifted. Not a full movement, just a small tilt of the head, and suddenly I could see its face. It was mine. Not a reflection, something else. A version of me that didn't belong, sitting there, staring back. A slow, almost imperceptible smile curled its lips. Not my smile. Not any expression I had ever made. Something inside me snapped. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as I scrambled away from the door. My breath came in ragged, uneven gasps, my vision swimming. A metallic click sounded from the unit. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned, and I ran. My legs carried me back to the office faster than I thought possible. My heart pounded, every muscle screaming as I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it on instinct. The monitors flickered. I forced myself to look. The storage lot was empty. No figure, no open door, just endless rows of lifeless metal units stretching into the night. I sat there, trembling, gripping the edge of the desk like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The air inside felt normal again. The pressure was gone. But something had changed. Because when I glanced at the small mirror on the wall, for just a split second, my reflection wasn't there. The office felt different now, not just because of what I had seen, but because of what I hadn't. I sat there, my breathing still ragged, my pulse refusing to slow. The cold sweat on my skin felt clammy, reality distorting at the edges. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to shake off the nausea creeping in my stomach. It wasn't real. It was just my imagination, right? I forced myself to look up. The mirror on the office wall reflected the desk, the old plastic chair, the flickering fluorescent light overhead. But not me. My chest tightened. It wasn't like before, when my reflection was just missing. This time, something else was there. A shadow began to form, right in the spot where my reflection should have been. At first it was vague, distorted, like a smudge on the glass. Then it took shape. It looked like me. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't. Its eyes were the first thing I noticed. They weren't mine. They were too dark, too hollow, two empty pits where light should have been. It was as if something had scooped out my humanity and left only a vacant shell behind. Then the smile came. A slow, unnatural stretch of the lips, curving too wide, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't even a cruel one. It was knowing. It was expectant. As if it had been waiting for this moment. I couldn't breathe. I sat frozen, my body locked in place, even as the thing in the mirror began to move. It took a step forward. Not me, just it. My stomach twisted. My hands were gripping the edge of the desk so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. I wasn't moving, but my reflection was. The realization slammed into me with the weight of a nightmare. This isn't a mirror. It had never been a mirror. It was a door, and something was trying to step through. The glass rippled, just slightly, like the surface of water disturbed by a single breath. I jerked back, my chair scraping loudly against the tile, but the thing in the mirror didn't flinch. It took another step, and then another. My own warped reflection was nearing the glass, but I knew, deep in my bones, that if it ever reached the other side, if it ever fully stepped through, I wouldn't be the one walking away. Panic surged through me, an animal instinct clawing its way to the surface. My body finally obeyed, my muscles uncoiling in a desperate rush. I grabbed the first thing I could, my coffee mug, and hurled it at the mirror. The impact was deafening. Glass shattered, shards exploding outward, cascading across the desk and floor in a shimmering rain of jagged edges. And just like that, the reflection was gone. Nothing stood there anymore, just the bare, cracked wall where the mirror had been mounted. The office felt normal again, no cold, no pressure, no sound. But the pit in my stomach didn't go away. Because I knew. The mirror breaking hadn't stopped it. I had only bought myself time. I staggered backward, hands shaking, my breath ragged. Every part of me screamed to leave, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The thing in the mirror hadn't been trapped behind the glass. It had just been waiting, watching. And now that I had seen it, it had seen me too. Somewhere, just beyond the reach of the flickering light, it was still waiting to step through. I don't remember running. I don't remember bursting through the office door, sprinting across the cracked asphalt of the lot, or fumbling with my keys to unlock my truck. All I know is that one moment I was standing in front of that shattered mirror, heart pounding like a trapped animal. And the next, I was somewhere else. When my mind returned to me, the world had changed. Morning light seeped into my vision, too bright, too sudden. The thick, suffocating dark of night had vanished without transition, leaving only the soft, golden hues of dawn stretching across the horizon. I was inside my truck, parked just outside the front gate of a one-self-storage. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The engine was off. The air was silent. The last thing I remembered clearly was the shattering of the mirror, the way the thing inside had vanished with the breaking glass. But how had I gotten here? Had I driven? Had I walked? Had I even left at all? My breathing was uneven, the edges of my thoughts blurred like smudged ink on wet paper. My body ached in strange, unfamiliar ways, as if I had been moving for hours, yet I couldn't recall taking a single step. Time had warped. Somehow, the long hours of the night shift had collapsed into nothing. It should have been 3 a.m., maybe 4 at the latest. But the radio clock on my dashboard told me otherwise. 7:06 a.m. My shift was over. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the numbness creeping into my thoughts. Maybe this was shock. Maybe my mind was shutting down, refusing to process what had happened. But deep down, I knew. Something was wrong. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. It was me. Same tired eyes, same stubble on my jaw, same weary expression I'd seen every morning for the past few years. But it didn't feel like me. I didn't feel like me. A chill crawled down my spine, slow and deliberate. I reached up and touched my face, running my fingers along my skin, feeling the warmth of my own flesh, the steady pulse beneath. Real. I was real. And yet, something was missing. A part of me had been left behind in that storage lot, in the shattered fragments of that mirror. I couldn't explain it, couldn't define it, but I felt it. Like a memory just out of reach, like a voice I should recognize but didn't. Something had changed, and I didn't know if I had truly escaped, or if something else had walked away in my place. I turned my key in the ignition, hands still trembling. The truck rumbled to life, the familiar sound grounding me for just a second. I needed to go home, needed to leave this place behind. But as I glanced one last time in the rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. Because for the briefest moment, my reflection didn't blink. The uneasy feeling didn't leave me, even as I drove home. The roads looked the same. The buildings, the trees, the familiar gas station on the corner, I recognized them all. But something about the world felt wrong, like a song played just a half step off key. I made it back to my apartment, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands, flexing my fingers, pressing my palm against my chest, just to feel the steady beat of my heart. I'm still here. That was what I kept telling myself, but the more I repeated it, the less certain I became. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I thought seeing the storage facility in daylight would make everything feel normal again. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I just needed someone, anyone, to acknowledge me, to tell me I still belonged here. I arrived just after 10 a.m. The sun was high, baking the asphalt, casting sharp shadows across the lot. Nothing looked out of place. No broken mirrors. No strange figures. Just rows of storage units standing silent beneath the heat. I stepped into the front office where the day shift manager, Bob, sat behind the desk, scrolling through paperwork with a bored expression. He looked up when the door chimed. And then, nothing. No recognition. No flicker of familiarity in his face. Just a polite, vaguely impatient stare. "Can I help you?" I hesitated, thrown off by the way he said it. I had worked here for weeks, long enough for Bob to at least acknowledge me. "It's me," I said, forcing a nervous chuckle. "I work the night shift. Just wanted to check in about—" Bob's brow furrowed. "Night shift?" "Yeah, last night, I stopped. A cold, creeping sensation unfurled in my gut as I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was something worse. "Sorry, man," Bob said, shaking his head. "We already hired someone for that position." The words didn't register at first. They bounced off the surface of my mind, as if refusing to sink in. "What?" "The night shift," Bob repeated slowly, as if I were a stranger asking about a job posting. "It's already filled. We hired a guy last week." My mouth went dry. "No, that's not. I work the night shift. You know me, Bob." Bob's expression hardened, shifting from mild annoyance to something colder. "Look, buddy," he said, standing up from his chair. "I don't know what kind of joke you're playing, but you don't work here. You never have." The air in the room changed. It wasn't just that Bob didn't recognize me. It was as if I had never existed at all. I opened my mouth to argue, to force some kind of explanation out of him. But then the office door swung open. A man walked in. He was tall, with broad shoulders, a clean-shaven face, and a casual confidence in his stride. And I knew him. I knew him before I had ever seen him. Because he was me. Not identical, no. His features were different in small, almost imperceptible ways. His jawline was sharper, his posture more assured, his uniform crisp and unwrinkled. But the way he moved, the way he carried himself, it was the same. Like someone had taken me and made a few adjustments. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Not surprised, not angry, just aware. And then he turned to Bob, as if I didn't exist. "Morning," he said, his voice steady and familiar in all the wrong ways. "Anything I need to know before tonight's shift?" Bob smiled. Smiled the way he used to smile at me. "Nah, nothing unusual. Just another quiet night." My stomach twisted. This was wrong. This was impossible. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Bob shot me a glare. "All right, I think you need to leave." "No!" I snapped, stepping forward. "I worked here. I was here last night." The man, the thing pretending to be me, finally turned to face me fully. His eyes met mine, and he smiled, the same smile I had seen in the mirror, a slow, deliberate curve of the lips, just a little too wide. "I think you're mistaken," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I've always worked here." I took a step back. "No." My voice barely came out. "That's not possible." Bob sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but if you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." I looked back at the other me, my pulse hammering in my skull. He didn't look smug. He didn't look victorious. He just watched, the way a hunter watches an animal thrashing in a trap. Because that's what I was now, wasn't I? A thing out of place, a piece that no longer fit. I stumbled out of the office, my vision blurring, my legs weak beneath me. The world around me felt unreal, too bright, too sharp, too wrong. I didn't belong here, not anymore. I didn't know where to go. Home? Would it still be my home? Would my things still be there? Would my name still be on the lease? I had a terrible feeling I already knew the answer. I gripped the sides of my head, trying to steady my thoughts. My reflection, my replacement, was still in there, probably talking to Bob like nothing had happened, like he had always been there, because to everyone else, he had. I turned, my breath hitching, my hands trembling, and I ran. Away from the storage lot, away from the office, away from the life that had once been mine. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Because I was nobody now. I had been erased, and something else was walking around in my skin. I tried to stay away. I really did. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how many miles I put between myself and A1 self-storage, it didn't matter. It was still there. Not just the place, the feeling, that gnawing sense of something unfinished, something stolen. I could feel it in the way people passed me on the street, their eyes sliding over me as if I wasn't even there. I could feel it in the way my apartment key no longer fit into the lock, in the way my name didn't show up in my phone's contacts, in the way my reflection in store windows seemed duller somehow, as if the light no longer fully touched me. I was fading. Not physically, no, I was still here, still breathing, still walking the streets, still feeling the night air on my skin. But I wasn't real anymore, not in the way that mattered, and the thing that had taken my place, it was. So I went back, because I had to know, I had to see for myself. Midnight found me standing at the edge of the A1 self-storage lot once more. The place looked the same as it had the night before, rows of corrugated metal doors, sodium vapor lights buzzing overhead, the faint hum of the nearby highway breaking the silence. But something was different. The air was heavier, the kind of weight you feel before a storm. I moved carefully, sticking to the shadows between the units, my footsteps unnervingly silent against the cracked pavement. I didn't know what I expected to find. I just knew where I had to go, to the far end of the lot, to 1906. I turned the last corner and stopped dead. The door was open, not wide, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness within. I swallowed, my throat dry, my pulse hammering. It was waiting for me. The last time I had looked inside, there had been a chair, a mirror. Something sitting inside it that shouldn't, now. Nothing. No chair, no mirror. Only dust and empty space. And on the ground, perfectly centered, as if deliberately placed. A neatly folded uniform. My uniform. The navy blue security shirt, the worn-out slacks. Even my name tag still pinned in place, gleaming dully under the dim light. I stared at it, my breath coming shallow and uneven. This was it. The proof. I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been replaced. The thing in the mirror. The thing that had moved when I hadn't. It had stepped through. It had taken my uniform, my name, my life. And I was nothing now. A shadow. A ghost of a man who no longer existed. I backed away, shaking, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to scream, to rage against the impossibility of it all. But what good would it do? I wasn't part of this world anymore. I had been erased, and something else was walking in my place. I turned away from the open storage unit, my mind a swirling mess of panic and understanding. I couldn't stay. Couldn't go back to the office, to my old life. That thing was living it now. It had Bob's trust, my routine, my habits. It had slotted into my place as if I had never been there at all. And no one would ever question it. Because as far as the world was concerned, it was me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty lot, the distant glow of the city beyond. Eventually, I turned and walked into the night, not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. And maybe, just maybe, I never really had. The truth settled in slowly, not in a single moment of realization, but in small, unbearable ways. The way my old apartment no longer existed, at least not for me. The way every familiar place felt unfamiliar, as if the world had reshaped itself just slightly in my absence. The way people's eyes passed over me, not in avoidance, not in fear, but with complete and utter indifference. As if I had never been there to begin with, I had been erased, and the world had moved on without me. I tried to fight it at first. I called my old number, but it didn't exist. I walked past my favorite diner, the one where the waitress always remembered my order, but she didn't even blink as I passed. I saw Bob once outside a gas station, laughing with another employee from the storage facility. For half a second, I thought about calling out to him, but I knew how it would end. He wouldn't recognize me, wouldn't hear me, and standing beside him, dressed in my uniform, with my easygoing smile, my confident posture, was him, the thing that had stepped out of the mirror, living my life, filling my space in the world as if I had never been there at all. I turned and walked the other way before he could see me, if he even could see me. I don't know why I went back to A1 self-storage. There was nothing left for me there, no answers, no way to reclaim what had been stolen. And yet, as the sun set, as the sky darkened, I found myself standing once again at the edge of the lot. The lights buzzed overhead, the storage units stretched out in neat, soulless rows. Nothing looked different, nothing felt different, but I knew. Something here had changed. Something was finished. I moved through the lot, unseen, unheard, past the office where my replacement was no doubt preparing for the night shift, until I reached the far corner, until I stood before 1906. The door was closed now, padlocked, secure, no signs of disturbance, no indication that it had ever been open. But I knew. I reached out and ran my fingers along the cold metal. It felt solid, real. But when I pressed my ear against the door, nothing. No echoes of movement, no muffled knocking, no distant, deliberate thud reverberating from within. The unit was empty, or maybe it had never truly been full. Maybe it had never been a storage unit at all, just a doorway, just a space that existed for a singular purpose. And now that purpose was complete. I stepped back, staring at the blank, soulless metal. I would never get answers. I understood that now. No one would ever tell me why this had happened or how it had chosen me. But as I stood there, a final chilling thought settled over me. It had to happen to someone. It had to. A machine doesn't run without fuel. A door doesn't open without something passing through. I had been chosen, randomly, unfairly, without reason. But what about the next person? What about the next poor soul who took the night shift, who sat alone in that office, listening to the slow, rhythmic knocking in the dark? Would they look into the mirror? Would they see something staring back? Would they, too, vanish without a trace? Their life worn by something else, something better than them, something the world would accept in their place without question? And when that happened, would I even remember them? Or had others come before me, just like this, and I had simply never known? Never noticed? The thought made me feel small, smaller than I had ever felt before, because in the end, I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. The process had already begun again, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I turned away from the storage unit for the final time, stepping back into the night, because I wasn't part of this world anymore. I was nothing now, and the world, it would keep moving forward without me.